I have George Giorgio with me from Father's House, and we're so thankful that he's part of our Keeping Up with the Corinthians series, because he's Greek, and also because he's got a unique insight on being single. Unfortunately, your Facebook status has never even been complicated, and for most pastors, this just becomes such a difficult thing to talk about, because most pastors I know are married, and that just disqualifies us from speaking at all to people who aren't yet. So talk to me about being single for a long period of time. Talk to me about what that's been like and the pros and cons and just your kind of love life and how that works.
It's a good topic. It's a great topic. Thank you for not talking about being single while being married. Mm-hmm. So I think that is a complicated space, and it's complicated because single people can easily be treated like there's something wrong, something missing, something incomplete. And I guess that's the part of the equation I enjoy talking about, because my life is as fulfilled as anybody else's, and I celebrate the journey I'm on and the stage and season I'm in. It doesn't disappoint me, it doesn't make me anxious. And I think that you've got to be graced to be married and you've got to be graced to be single. And the fact that we need to journey with God in either of those spaces doesn't make it any different for anyone. So I hope for single people out there listening to this, and I don't wish singleness for long periods of time on anyone, but I do wish God's perfect will for your plan, your purpose, your life. And that you've got to be graced for it either way.
The idea that you have to be graced for marriage actually makes sense in retrospect always. People, if only I could be married, my life would be great. And then you get married and realize that it's difficult.
It's a learning curve. It's a learning curve, and it's a discovery, because that's all aimed towards revealing Christ into your life. And so marriage is this incredible picture of this new person that is formed to become one. It's similar to the relationship we have with Christ. He enters into our lives, he journeys with us, he transforms us. But being single doesn't mean you're excused from growing.
Okay, so there's been a learning curve to that as well.
100%.
Talk to us about that.
You still got to grow, but you've got to now use other kinds of relationships to make sure that you don't have blind spots, to make sure that you don't get into a negative or a single-minded approach that's unhealthy. So you still have to be relationally wired in the right ways, in community with the right people, so that you're not growing in the wrong way.
Sure.
And so you could be married to the right person or somebody who seems like the wrong person for you. Similarly, for a single person, you could be in relationships with the wrong people for you. And just because a married person has to pray about that doesn't mean a single person shouldn't be praying about who they're in relationships with.
Sure.
Because they have the same consequence on your life as a spouse potentially would have, either in cheering you on to become the man you're supposed to be, or potentially pulling you back towards something you shouldn't be. And so my encouragement to single people is, it's not an opportunity to avoid the topic. It simply means you have to tackle it from your point of view, your context, your way forward.
It's amazing, because often we're thinking about speaking into conflict and hard conversations, and so often we go, married people would love to hear about this. For single people, even with with the utmost respect, we often worry that for single people it's like, oh, nice to know, but I can always walk away from a friendship. I can't always walk away from a marriage. You're saying you have to take those friendships as seriously.
You do, because if I walk away from the conversation around what does conflict add to my maturity, then as a single person, what you actually worry about is, what about me is not growing and I'm not aware? So I don't walk away thinking, oh, this is irrelevant. I walk away thinking, is there a deficiency in my space that I'm not aware of, and how do I address that? So a single person doesn't cut that out. They just have to reinvent the solution to be appropriate. And I think that just simply means honorable relationships. It just means good community, good participation, and open heart. Thing is, you can get hard-hearted when you're single and not have somebody challenge the tenderness of your heart. And so that's something you're going to work on. You get too hard-hearted in your relationship, your spouse is going to bring that up. And it's going to force you to re-engage that space. And so single people have to do the same thing. And I really, for me, the differences are not as big as one thinks. I think it really ultimately starts coming down to, we've still got to grow. We need people in our lives in order to grow. We've got to pray about who those people are. Where it gets different is sex is off the table. And so engaging the conversation around what happens on sexual fulfillment versus a sense of being complete as a human being, I guess that's a topic on its own.
Well, let's go there a little bit. Sex being off the table for many married couples. It's not on the table either. But there is a school of thought, I suppose, that boys have got to sow their wild oats, that there's a thirst that has to be quenched, an itch that has to be scratched. And at a more fundamental level, I think people would like to say, I have a right to express my sexual orientation, I have a right to express my sexual desires. And if I'm denied that, people ought to feel sorry for me, it's an injustice or whatever. What would you say to that as someone who's denied themselves?
Yeah, so I guess you have to navigate this space from the following point of view. What do you think sex is going to offer your soul, your identity, your ego, and your spiritual journey? Because I think there's a disconnect there. I think what people think sex is going to provide for them is not actually what happens. And then you have a deficiency anyway, an incompleteness anyway. So for me, it's really straightforward. I have to acknowledge and recognize that as somebody who's got no sexual expression as part of my spiritual journey and my physical journey, I got to acknowledge I still lack nothing. I now have to derive my sense of a complete person in my expression, in the way I live my life, the things I'm doing with my life, and the relationships I've got in my life. The truth is, though, that so do you have to as a married person. Because although healthy sexuality does do something very significant, it is very significant for marriage. It is insignificant out of marriage.
What do you think people are expecting out of sex a lot of the time that they find, oh, it's actually not that?
I think you get a certain level of validation, a certain level of being wanted and needed, a certain level of fulfilling somebody else. So there's that equation of being wanted and needed simultaneously. I think what it doesn't do that a lot of people hope it would is to wash away insecurities, agitations, frustrations, inferiorities, and sort of on the other side of this magical moment, you're going to be a better person and it's just going to make things work better. That's not realistic. If anything, I think that being a complete person makes you a better sexual person. And I think we've got it the wrong way around. And as a result of that, the expectation's unreasonable, the result is unhealthy, the harm is done. And there's a little bit of deception that can happen both to single people and married people. Single people can be deceived thinking, if I'm not having sexual experience, I'm not a fulfilled person. Married people can feel, if the sex is good, then everything must be good. And both are being deceived. It's deeper than that. How are you doing on other areas? Could you be using your sexuality to avoid dealing with other stuff? So there's an equation that we both have to discuss and deal with. We just have to do it from a different point of view. And I think it's important. We need to recognize our Lord and Savior, the one whose footsteps we walk in, was not married.
If sexual expression was key to
being a
fulfillment,
complete person,
Jesus,
you got yourself some trouble there. And so therefore my conclusion is not marriage is bad, marriage is good. In fact, the Bible is very clear that marriage is fundamental. Garden of Eden, perfect place, unity of a man and a woman. So we don't deny that. I think that's important. And if single people get negative about marriage, I would say that they've entered into some kind of a stronghold negativity. Walk away from that. You can be single and be happy for married people. Otherwise, you're unhealthy. But I think the importance in the equation is recognizing that marriage and sexuality does not complete you. Spiritual journey completes you, and complete people are better at marriage and sexuality.
Another conception, certainly as an adolescent who struggled with lust and urges and so on, there was always this idea that the longer I let this head of steam build up, the worse it's going to get. Eventually, I'm going to express myself anyway. So certainly my experience has been that maybe that's actually the opposite of what happens, that the more you feed the beast, the more hungry it gets. As someone who's had to just figure out your physical journey, is that true? Does it get harder and harder and harder, or does it actually get easier and easier for those who are trying to remain pure?
And so the answer to that is it doesn't get harder if the method of managing your mind, your heart, your soul, and your body is healthy. Because the truth of the matter is you could be married and have a disconnect between the spouses on sexual expectation. One having a higher appetite and the other perhaps a lower. So you're still going to manage some stuff there. And you have to do that without being unhealthy and unbiblical. And so the experience for me as a single person is simply you can't walk near that and expect to be able to manage it well. It's simply better to close the door on all those visual stimulants, on all those conversations, on all those movie clips, anything that could potentially awaken something. It's better to not go near that than to try to manage and fight that equation all the time. Married people still have to manage your sexual expectation. Otherwise, it gets abusive, it gets unreasonable, it can even become quite spiritually weird. And so I think it doesn't get harder. You get into a rhythm of who you are in your relationship with God, and you get to understand how to navigate that. But you need to do that as a married person too.
Absolutely, yeah. That idea that if I just allow myself to get unfit at managing that stuff, that it'll be solved in marriage is an absolute fallacy. You have the very same fitness or rhythm or mechanisms that you get good at staying out of bed before married are the same ones you'll need to stay in bed when you are married. It's one of the
100%.
same.
And should things go wrong in marriage, you don't want this, but if it lands in a divorce, you then have a person who's had a sexual expression, now divorced and single again, and having to go back to that status of managing that. And yet God graces people to do that. Now I don't want to create the impression that it's an unsolvable equation. It's solvable. God can give you the authority and the power to be able to live that kind of life based on the season you're in. The one other thing I do want to say to single people is that in order to be healthy in that space, you've got to be active in other areas of your life. So if you look at that scripture in Corinthians that kind of everybody jokes about, only get married for sort of lustful reasons, and if you stay single, then you can serve the Lord more, and we joke about that a lot. But the truth of the matter is that if I am absolutely fulfilled in purpose, I don't need to be fulfilled in a partner. So if you're going to be single for a period of time, find a purpose and be fulfilled in that. Go home at night and lie in your bed thinking, it was a good day today, and it's going to be a good day tomorrow. That's going to meet a certain void in your life that doesn't need to be met sexually.
And in fact, you would say sex promises that and actually is a very bad deliverer on that anyway.
It's a temporary fix to that feeling. The next day comes and you've got to navigate that same again. And so similarly for single people, you've got to get to the end of the day and be validated by saying, I really felt like I was in my zone, in my sweet spot, doing what I'm gifted to do, called to do, want to do, and enthusiastic about. You sleep well at night. You sleep well at night. And the truth is, you're a married man, you'll understand this either as a pastor or in counseling, you can have great sex and still sleep badly. Because there's other stuff going on in your head and your heart that are not in sync with what God's called you to be.
Yeah.
And you can even inoculate yourself through good sexual experience as an avoidance to tackling what's actually going on and how you're doing on life purpose. And it can sometimes mistakenly be a kind of a distraction from dealing with the real deal. And so in that sense, I feel a little blessed. I don't have that distraction yet. Obviously, I have a loneliness in a different way. And you've got to acknowledge that if you're single, there's an element of loneliness. You have to make peace with that. Similarly, I guess if you're married, you have to make peace with alone time is harder. Once you have kids, me time is harder. You have to make peace with that. Single people have to make peace with the idea that there is an element of loneliness, and you've got to navigate that and do yourselves a favor. Never allow a negative emotion to produce an action.
If there's one final thought or encouragement that you could leave with a bunch of single, divorced, maybe even married people who are for the first time thinking, I can actually be in charge of these sexual desires. I can, in fact, go beyond just being a sexual person. In fact, Jesus was fully fulfilled and he didn't express himself. What final encouragement or hope would you have for us?
I mean, lots of hope, of course. Very excited about my life. Very excited about everything I get to be part of and get to do. As a final thought, don't allow your relationship status or your sexual status to define who you are. You're bigger than that. You're more than that. You've got more to you than that. And to bring our entire sense of personal identity, purpose, and fulfillment down to whether I am or am not in a relationship and whether that is the best or not the best sex I've ever had is so unbelievably carnal that it shouldn't be a definition. And so to the single people, especially in this space where you're not expressing life that way, just express it another. What you have is a lot of life. Express it.
It's awesome.
Hope that was helpful.
Thanks, George.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much.